So without further ado, let's kick off this morning's session. And it is being chaired by Simon Inger Consulting Limited, with a fabulous panel to take you through Rethinking Publication. Simon.
Okay, thanks Audrey, and welcome everybody. Thanks for coming along to our session, Rethinking Publication, the drivers, technologies and financing behind bold innovations. So we've done, I've seen widescreen presentations before, but I've never had a widescreen audience before. So apparently on screen 1 over there we've got Blair Witch, on screen 2 over there we've got It, and on screen 3 we have another horror show going on here. But anyway, we're going to try and make this quite interactive with the audience, so if you're feeling isolated towards the edges, you might want to sort of at least focus in on this part later. So I hope we're going to have thought-provoking and a highly interactive panel-led discussion on some fascinating initiatives in the industry going on right now. As Audrey said, my name's Simon Inger. I work as a consultant in the scholarly publishing area, having been involved primarily with journals, and I use that word advisedly, the very definition of which is probably something that was up for debate here today. I've been working in this space for about 30 years. We have a fantastic panel of experts with us who are going to share their thoughts on a series of questions that we think deserve discussion. So we have Louise Page from PLOS, John Inglis from Cold Spring Harbor, Liz Allen from F1000, Hannah Hope from Wellcome, and Kristen Ratan from Collaborative Knowledge Foundation. Or am I allowed to call you Coco? Friends get to call this Coco, so we're all friends, so that's good. The very fact that it took us several months to get to a consensus on the title of this session, I think is already some testament to the diverse set of opinions held by our panel. So I'm looking forward to some real insights into initiatives today. So the way we've structured this event is that I will ask a series of 5 questions that our panelists have had foresight of. For each question, we have a lead respondent from the panel who will address the question in some detail. Then we'll open up the floor for further comment, and it's not meant to be Q&A at that point. Like very much do you say, actually, I totally disagree. I want to put this point of view instead. So don't consider that just Q&A, and certainly not just directed at the person who has responded. So after that, we'll come back to the other panelists for their additional thoughts on that subject. Depending on how it goes, I do have a bonus 6th question to ask as well. So hopefully that will work, broadly on time. So without further ado, I will get on with the questions. And here's the first question. And our lead respondent to this will be Louise Page. So 20 years after people first raved about it, did we finally discover the article economy? Louise.
Thank you very much, everybody, for having me here, and thank you, Simon, for the question. So I will start off by saying that these are largely my thoughts, not PLOS's per se, but about the article economy, because this is largely about what is and where is publishing going. So in answer to that question, my answer is no. Have we actually realized an article economy? And the reasons I don't think we have are around much of the influences that exist in publishing have not fully gone away that would make an article economy thrive. The career incentives for the researchers, for the people who actually write the articles, is still driven by a journal brand. We still have impact factor having impact despite all of our efforts. Publishing is not a commodity. We definitely still hold a lot of the strings, a lot of the power, a lot of the experience around what actually constitutes publishing, and we also take on a lot of the cost. Credit is still tied to authorship. There is a lot of work that's done in the lab, as part of the article as an output, but that credit really still sits with that author in the author byline. Articles are still article shaped. You know, even though we're talking about an article economy, I think the idea that research, which is not article shaped, is still not getting out there in the way that it can best be communicated and best be reused and shape science. The idea of a non-peer review or un-peer review or changing peer review still hasn't flourished. We still try year after year after year. I think we've been doing this for decades now, where somebody will try something related to peer review, and it has a sort of a little bang, and then it kind of fizzles. So, where are we with open peer review? Not really there. Where are we with review after publication? Starting to make some space there, but it's really hasn't replaced a traditional peer review process. Open access growth has flattened. I mean, it's still growing, but it's certainly not on any kind of a hockey stick. And so that's something that, we certainly at PLOS are looking at. And while all of us are sitting in this room, and we're largely based in the US and in Western Europe, we all can talk about how we want this to change, how we see room for this to change. Yet China, the global South, they're not so interested in this. They're still really interested in impact factor. They're still driving careers and driving and pushing buttons for their researchers based on whether or not you have published in Cell or Nature or Science or The Lancet. So I always like to say no but instead of just plain old no. And so there's been a lot of change in this last 20 years. And some of it has been very recent in the last 3 years, last 2 years. And I think that these changing factors are the ones that we should all be looking at, particularly as they mash up, particularly as they combine into different forces of nature, into different movements that will affect us, either as publishers and as curators and as stewards of all this science. And so I don't think I need to go through all these in the limited time that I have, but what I want to talk about is how they might combine and how they are combining now in ways that we should watch. So let's talk just for a moment about the pirates. And so, the predators and the sci-hubs of this world are definitely taking OA rogue. They're taking the ability of the internet to basically download everything, as we all know, and create different enterprises, different businesses, but also to subvert the existing business in many ways. And what is interesting about this from a PLOS perspective is that Sci-Hub pretty much left us out of this for a very long time, for obvious reasons. And so they actually directed an enormous amount of traffic to us. So anybody who was looking for something on Sci-Hub for PLOS, they actually ended up at PLOS. Recently, they changed that. And so now PLOS is actually mirrored within Sci-Hub. We actually have a nice, lovely Sci-Hub URL, and we have a Sci-Hub brand, but it is still got PLOS brand on it. And so what we're watching is, what does that mean? What does that matter for us as an OA, CC BY, Born Digital publisher? What do we think of that? So we're starting to have that conversation internally, and I don't have the answer to that right now. I've also heard anecdotally that the Sci-Hub traffic represents maybe about 20% of the overall traffic for that particular publisher, but it's not taking away from the existing traffic in a significant way. So it's almost like there's this new audience out there. So it's still something to, again, this is something to watch, because what's happening here, particularly with Sci-Hub, is that they're not creating a avenue for doing more research. What happens with our content is that all of our ALMs, our article level metrics, are broken, all of our links and our references are broken, all of that avenue and that ability for the user to get more information in their pursuit of scientific education, they're gone. So it becomes a cul-de-sac of information. And so whether or not that's what the researchers want, and all the stuff we've been doing and layering around the article and creating these connections are useless or not meaningful or not worth what we think they're worth, that actually is something that we all need to be looking at. So another thing that's happening certainly is the advent of another kind of output, another target. So we all talk about articles, but when you start thinking about preprints, when you start thinking about review after publication, such as like what F1000's doing, then you start really opening up a whole new world of how you're doing assessment, how you are judging somebody, how you get published, what value that has, and what that feedback from the author, from the reader community is in helping you develop your research. It has an effect on time to publication. It has an effect on licensing. It has an effect on how quickly information is getting out there and being used and reused. So there is a very large set of groups who are working in this space. And so while Archive and SSRN have been around for 20 years and are very, very large, bioRxiv is only a handful of years old and is growing steadily. COS is launching new preprint servers pretty much every week, it feels like. So these are starting to really take root. Where they're going to go, though, is still an open question. Does a preprint server with 12 preprints on it really make an impact? Does it really make a difference? Is that what the readers need? Is that what the audiences need? I think that this will, have this sort of burst of growth. It's like the spring, but then, we need to see where this all goes and what pops up again next year. Open Access 2020 is something that, from the standpoint of where the countries, where the institutions start having more power, or they start exerting more power, and the funders start exerting more power around what it is that gets published, where is it getting published, how is it getting published, and really breaking down the business models of what we've been doing. That is a very changing dynamic. And as the funders and the institutions, who are in fact the ones who set the career parameters for the researchers who then have to create articles which get published in journals, as they change their tune, as they start changing their incentives and what they expect out of their funded research, that could also have a big effect. The other thing that I like to look at is what's happening in Global South and what's happening in Africa. I've heard anecdotally that about 90% of all funded content in Africa never sees the light of day. Why is that? Not really sure why, but there is an enormous amount of information that still isn't getting published. Then I just want to end talking a little bit about open science. People talk about it, people hear about it, people bandy it about, but I don't think everybody has a general or specific definition for it. And so these are just a bunch of players in this space right now, but it is a huge space. So I don't have enough space on this slide. But the idea is that when you focus on the data, when you focus on the research, when you focus on the science and how somebody can reproduce it, how somebody can learn from it, how someone could build on that and make more content and create more science, that actually is part of where this comes from. And where it's connected, very importantly, is to the infrastructure. Right now, our infrastructure is teeteringly old. 20 plus years old is this technology that all of us sit on top of. And so as long as we sit on top of all this old technology, as well as subscribe to practices that have been around for 350 years, there isn't going to be a lot of change. But as this part changes, as the open source allows for publishing to become a bit more of a commodity, that others can do it reliably and responsibly, that the cost of doing it really reduces, what could we do with that money? What could we do and invest back into the systems that would enhance how all of this conversation goes on? So this, I think, is also a very big part of where certainly our lives at PLOS are turning, but where everything is turning. So asking this question again, did we finally discover it? Maybe ask me next year. Things are moving very quickly, and so we should have that conversation again.
Okay, thanks very much, Louise. Okay, so what I want to do now is, as I said, open this up to the floor. There should be roving mics around. I've made a big mistake in all the hiatus of yesterday's travel of leaving my glasses at Heathrow. So I can't really see many of you, so you have to wave quite violently if you'd like to speak. Excuse me if I don't call you up by name because I can't see a thing, really. Any questions from the floor at this point? Or statements or counter positions?
Partly, I just want to prove that I am listening while I'm knitting. Tasha Mellins-Cohen, Microbiology Society. You talked at the end about infrastructure, and this is, I think, the first time that I've heard anybody at any conference acknowledge that our infrastructure is really old. So thank you. That was my only point on that. The question that I did have, you talked a little bit about sort of the open science driving change in the publishing industry. How much further do you think we have to go before that becomes commonly acknowledged as something that publishers should be engaging with?
Well, I think publishers are already engaged in it in a lot of different ways. So the things that we care about and what the researchers care about is related to, one of the big things is data right now. And the management of data is incredibly difficult because it's very big, it keeps changing. The ownership of it is very tricky, the reuse of it, what systems do you need to have in order to run it. And so as publishers, we should be including as part of our content all the supporting information that goes with that article, where it came from, so that it can be reproduced, and so that it can stand up and it can move on. And again, that infrastructure that goes with the data should continue to go. That's just the beginning of it. Then there's also the protocols. Protocols have been around for decades and even longer. And so it's a very important part of what makes up the article. And so as publishers, again, making sure that we provide that tool, the context for where this article came from, so that they aren't just these boxed PDFs and they aren't just these flat images, essentially, of what that research had been. And so I think that as we start linking in and connecting all of this stuff together, that will become more valuable to the authors and to the readers. But I'm still, to be honest, I hesitate, because I know it's the right thing and I know it's the good thing to do, but I want to see how people are using it. I want to see how people need to use it. And it's a lot of information. They already have a lot of information. And now you're saying, oh, okay, now go download this 95 megabyte file over here. And it's just a lot of information out there right now. So I want to think about, what does that discovery look like? What is the context that really helps the researcher as they move forward?
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor? Yeah. You got a microphone here, that'd be great.
Right, thank you. Pippa Smart from Learned Publishing. Great talk, thank you, very interesting. But I wonder whether we're not really going about this the wrong way, because we're as a publishing industry, are trying to come up with innovative solutions for what we perceive to be problems. But actually the real drivers are academia, they're institutions, they're funders. And on the one hand, they're saying they want open science, they want open publications. But on the other hand, they're rewarding their researchers for publishing in the high impact journals. So, I think we're, to a certain extent, we're trying to come up with new ideas, but I'm not sure how that's working with the people that are actually driving the publications. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think Hannah should take that one.
Okay. Brilliant. Thanks.
So I think that it's not only publishers that are trying to come up with new ideas of ways of rewarding scientists, it's funders as well. We for many years have stated that the venue of publication is not important. We are signatories of DORA, and we are increasingly trying to work to ensure that all research outputs are recognized. So we are not just interested in the publication, we're interested in the data sets, we're interested in the code, we're interested in the peer review, we are interested in all the different aspects that make up research in this modern day world. Whether we have yet fully convinced the research community that that's what we're interested in, I think there is more that we could do there across the board as funders and institutions, but it is certainly something that we're working on, and it's what researchers work. But I think we all need to work to empower researchers to feel more engaged with the publishing or the communication process of science. And the advantages that it can bring, not just of the actual article, but all of the additional things that go around it that Louise mentioned.
Other comments from the panel? John.
What strikes me, I thought Louise gave a great account of a very complicated topic, but what strikes me is how variable attitudes and behaviors are from discipline to discipline. So some of the people that I talk to are in fields like synthetic biology or machine intelligence or even just plain old bioinformatics. And they have their own values and their own ways of appreciating each other. They make collaborations based on what people can do, not by where they published their paper. And they sort of either chafe at the constraints that the conventional publishing program infrastructure puts on them, or they just ignore it and they go about interacting with each other in their own way, because that fundamentally is about getting the work done. And particularly the closer you get to tool building, then the more independent such researchers can be.
I think that's a very good point. I think that the discipline, the variety between disciplines and their willingness to just ignore the publishing sort of infrastructure is, yeah.
I mean, I think Louise alluded to the article shape, and you know, we have an essentially sort of 19th century article shape, which doesn't fit for a lot of what modern research turns out.
Well, and the physicists have been doing this for a long time with archive. They still publish in journals, but it's sort of a formality. It's this kind of final step, but it's not where the action is happening for them.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Hannah said in response to Pippa, is that, you know, Wellcome represents a forward-thinking funder. Not all funders have this mentality, and certainly ones in, as I was saying, in China and in South America, they definitely don't. And so I don't know what it will take in order for the funders and for the institutions writ large in order to recognize that they have created a culture that we're all participating in here, and that it's very hard for us to wag the dog. And so how does this change? I haven't quite seen it. I do wonder, you know, when I look at what's happening with OA 2020 and that the countries and the institutions and the funders are actually getting behind something like that, that actually could drive more change. But I think that's still to be seen.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question now. My next question, which John Inglis is going to tackle first, is the move by some publishers into preprint servers a defensive measure or a recognition of the evolution of academic communication? John, thank you.
Well, good morning, and my thanks to ALPS for the invitation to come here. I owe that invitation, I think, to the fact that for the past few years I've been involved in a preprint project called BioArchive, and I'm going to take my glasses off because now I realize I'm supposed to be looking at the screen down here. I just want to give some context before really addressing the question. Bioscience preprints are new, as has already been said. They've been around in physics and mathematics for 25 years, but they are relatively new in bioscience. There are currently several sources of bioscience preprints, BioArchive being only one of them. All of these initiatives have begun just in the past 4 years. On BioArchive alone, there are 15,000 preprints, and we're increasing that number by about 1,000 a month. I actually don't know the total number of preprints in biosciences. I should know that number, but I can't give you it at the moment. In our shop, we have 82,000 authors, a lot of institutions, and it's really a worldwide, a momentum that's coming worldwide. And all of the traditional disciplines of bioscience are represented in the corpus of work that we post. 30% of the manuscripts that are posted to BioArchive are revised. I make that point only to say that, you know, it's not just a change in one kind of practice, but a bunch of other practices also change at the same time. Revision is a relatively new thing in bioscience. 60% of those preprints are published in journals within a couple of years, and a very large number and array and type and style and prominence of journal have published preprints that appeared first on BioArchive. We also have a mechanism for transferring manuscripts from bioarchive to journals, and that is a growing program, enthusiastically embraced by authors, but also by an increasing number of publishers and journal editors. So this initiative was begun by Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, which may be unfamiliar to you. It's 125 years old. It's a research institution. It has been a cradle of genetics and molecular biology and genomics, but for much of its life, it has also been a place where scientists came to share their work in person, and that has evolved in form of publishing journals, publishing books, protocols, manuals, and so on. So this institution has a history of engagement with the communication and the sharing of science, and bioarchive is very much, therefore, an evolution of its activities in that respect. And we are now extremely fortunate to be the beneficiary of support from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, not just financial support, but engineering, strategy, and other forms of collaboration, which is an enormous pleasure. So finally, to Simon's question, is the move, well, I won't read it, it's there on the screen, but I have to say that the more I looked at this question, the more sort of puzzled I was by it. So first of all, a move. What exactly is that? Are we talking about the initiation of preprint activity? Are we talking about the acquisition of an existing preprint server? As I'm sure many of you know, Elsevier purchased the Social Science Research Network, which has been around for 20 years and was a company, although not everybody realized that. And now it is part of Elsevier and being integrated into its activities, and the content that has appeared over the years on SSRN that is relevant to chemistry and to biology is being repurposed into BioRN and ChemRN. But maybe collaboration is what we mean by a move. And as I have indicated in the bioarchive figures, there are many publishers with whom we are collaborating very happily, and we hope to do much more of that. So the move by publishers, well, I think we need to define publishers. If you look at the many preprint initiatives across all of scholarly communication, there are many different types of organizations and groups that give rise to these kinds of activities. The most common is a small group of scholars who get together and say, we want to share our pre-published work, and we're going to band together, we're going to find a hosting service, and we're going to just do it. And as Louise has already said, Center for Open Science is a home to several of those initiatives, and that is a growing enterprise. But then you also have standalone services of the kind that bioarchive and archive represent. And then you have an initiative like ChemArchive, which is owned by the American Chemical Society, but is going to be run in partnership with various other organizations that are prominent in chemistry. So in that instance, that they are a publisher, but publishing is part of a broader mission, as it is indeed with bioarchive and its roots in an academic institution. So we need to be a little bit more precise about defining that term. Speaking of definitions, what is a preprint? We define it as a complete manuscript that has yet to be certified by peer review, and it is shared by the author either before submission to a journal or at submission to a journal. But there are increasingly diverse flavors of that kind of activity. I think Liz is going to talk about the Faculty of 1000 model, where a manuscript is submitted to a journal and it is peer-reviewed in situ. Wellcome Open Research, which Hannah will discuss, has a similar model. You may be familiar with Cell Press's recent Sneak Peek initiative, where they expose to a Mendeley group the manuscripts that are being considered by their editorial staff. And Nature Communications has just announced an initiative that is a little similar to that, in the sense that they provide a list of papers that they are reviewing with links back to a preprint server where an earlier version of the manuscript might have originated. So there are different varieties of early communication of work, different models, and no doubt the evolution of each one of them will be a little different. What then is a server? I mean, we define bioRxiv as a server, not a service. One might argue that what Faculty of 1000 is doing, for example, is providing a service to authors by exposing their work during the process of peer review. But when I say server, I mean a standalone mechanism for the distribution of work that has been posted by authors or on behalf of publishers. Again, a defensive measure. Well, a defense against what exactly? There is clearly no money to be made in preprints at this point. It is not a business model. It is at best a service to authors, and one that they increasingly seem to value. What is the evolution of the use of preprints in certain kinds of science? Will it lead eventually to the death of subscription journals, or even the death of open access journals, or will it eventually change the process of peer review, making, for example, open peer review or post-publication or post-posting peer review more prevalent? As Louise has indicated, many of the processes and structures in our scholarly communication infrastructure are very resistant to change. Preprints have been around for 25 years, but we still have physics journals. We still have mathematics journals, and they are important. When we were considering bioRxiv, I talked to a physicist who said, everybody looks at arXiv every day to see what happened in their field yesterday, but nobody got a job simply by posting to arXiv. Journals still matter, and certainly as far as bioRxiv is concerned, they continue to matter and will. So a recognition of what exactly and how? Is this process of preprinting something to be embraced, to be cherished, nurtured, incorporated into the way that we do things? We are very grateful for the support that preprint activities is getting from various funders, and increasingly academic institutions are saying that they want candidates for faculty positions to produce preprints as in support of their application. And then there are organizations like NIH which have said we will accept preprints as a support for a grant application or a progress report. These are all very positive moves and encouraging, of course, to the scholar who sees that there is some material benefit to be had from posting her manuscript in an appropriate server. And then there's the question of evolution. Well, is this an evolution? Is the idea of evolution is that the end point is more perfectly adapted to the purposes required? One has to ask oneself, is a preprint server in the earth sciences going to become a channel for politically motivated discussion of climate change? Is a preprint server in medicine going to become a channel for politically motivated discussion of race and intelligence? Or perhaps the desire of a pharmaceutical company's PR department to get a very favorable result for a clinical trial broadcast to a public that perhaps is unable or unwilling or insufficiently sophisticated to understand that this is not peer-reviewed, approved, certified content. These are all issues that we who are involved in preprint services are wrestling with, will have to wrestle with, and we are engaged in that conversation across disciplines and within disciplines. So some of you are going to say, why don't you answer the bloody question? And the fact is that I rather admired Louise's elegant avoidance of the answer as well. The fact is that the answer to this question is yes. Both of them. And with that, I will stop.
Memo to self, never put an or in a question. Thanks very much, John. Let's open this up to the floor. Let's have some comments. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Martin Rittman from MDPI. Maybe I can answer the question more directly as a publisher who set up a preprint server. So MDPI set up preprints.org last year. And the reasons for doing so were really because it was an interesting project. And it fits very much within the values of what we're doing. So we're an open access publisher. And one of the key things we want to do is publish rapidly. So make sure that the papers are not sat around for a long time in peer review, that the research is out there and out in the open and readable and usable as soon as possible. But even with journals and the fastest you can do peer review, maybe you can get 30 days if you're lucky. It's typically the papers are sat around for 2 or 3 months. And the big advantage that we see from preprint servers as a benefit to the research community is just the speed that you can get research out there. And they fit very well with, there are people calling for the end of journals now that preprint servers are here, but at the same time it also allows journals to, maybe I think Kent Anderson suggested this on Scholarly Kitchen, that journals can actually take their time with peer review if something is already out there and usable by other researchers. So yeah, I think there's probably different motivations for different publishers, but that's kind of a flavour of why we set up a preprint server.
I'll just say, responding to that and also some of the discussion that happened earlier, I think one of the key things is that I think we've been, as an industry, very blunt and kind of applying the same approach to the old disciplines, and I think we need to be much more flexible. I think that's happening now. And the same in funding. I think there isn't one size fits all. I think we perhaps ought to be evolving things, but not trying to think that everything applies to every discipline in the same way. So I think in being, supporting open science, or whatever open science is, because that's another thing that is a different topic. I don't really think we all know what we mean by that. In the same way, I don't think we all mean the same thing when we talk about open access. So I think there's lots of kind of issues, but I think one size does not fit all, and I think in going forward we'd be mistaken to try to do that.
It's more of a comment than a question, really. I mean, there's a lot of activity in peer review in preprints and that sort of thing. So I guess my question is that, do we need traditional journals at all if that kind of takes off?
Phil, I think that we will see evolution in this space. The fact remains that peer review varies enormously in its rigor, authority, quality, helpfulness to authors, varies from journal across the spectrum of journals. And I think for many scholars, they feel that there is some necessity to be seen to be published in a journal that is called a peer-reviewed journal. But often it is an utterly unhelpful process that merely slows things down. And Martin is quite correct, of course, that preprint servers have the enormous benefit of allowing that instant communication with the people that you want to communicate with. So I would say that if there is a long-term benefit to be had from preprint servers, then it may be to improve the overall quality and value of peer review for authors. Maybe it will lead to the demise of journals that do not provide that kind of value for the scholarly community.
So I have a slightly different answer to that. There's certainly a worldview that, yeah, it could mean the end of the journal. But there is something that John said that I sort of want to take up, which is, he said that there is no business model around preprints. There is absolutely a cost to doing preprints. There's a cost to doing publishing. There's a cost to everything that we do. It's cost to the infrastructure, all of that. And we can't just ignore that we can just blindly put up millions of preprints a year and there's no cost, or that the funders are going to continually fund that. I want to challenge that. I do want to think about, what is that new business model? What is that new exchange of the finances that benefits the author's career, that ensures that the organizations or the people who are taking up whatever that new publishing enterprise is are made whole, not necessarily making buco bucks, but they're still, not losing money. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. And so for right now, while things are bolstered by generous funding, there's going to be a point where we definitely do need to look at how we make this financially viable. How do we make this sustainable? And right now, where preprints are in the biomedical sciences, they're representing roughly 2% of total output. So it's still early days. There's a lot of headroom here in order to try to figure this out, whether it is going to be about the displacement of assessment or whether it's going to be about the displacement of the publisher or our brands or what have you. That's still to be seen. But I don't want to lose sight of that almighty dollar in all this.
Louise, I totally agree with you. I don't think we have a difference of opinion there. But one of the challenges, I think, is going to be the fact that as soon as the internet showed scholars that they could disseminate their work without the intervention of journals, then the question became, well, what is it that journals provide? And journals provide peer review, primarily. So if you want to charge for a preprint, then the question is, how much, at what stage in the process, and who pays? Mm-hmm. It's certainly the case that in biomedicine, if we wanted to try to introduce a for-fee preprint service, bioRxiv would never have gained whatever momentum it has. Interestingly, the physicists, the archive has a sustainability model which does not involve charging the scholar herself. So I think we really have to figure out who benefits from the output and attach the charges to those stakeholders that benefit. And in the case of funders, then it seems to me that funders have said, we are willing to support preprints because we, the funder, benefit from the large and open dissemination of the work that we have chosen to support. So there's the investment right there. And that makes perfect sense to me.
But I think the key here is that it really is early days. And even though archive's been around for a long time, it interestingly, publishing a preprint for your average physicist is a reputation-building activity. This is where other physicists go. They know that their colleagues will see them. It is a reputation-building activity that is on par with publishing in a journal. It hasn't replaced the journals, but it has its own kind of weight and merit. I don't think that's true in other fields yet, but if we follow that trajectory forward, it may very well become true. And I think once you have a reputation-building activity that a lot of people are doing, business models will naturally emerge. And so I'm not too concerned that there isn't a business model yet. I think it's just too early for us to know what those are. Funders are perfectly happy paying for APCs typically on a journal article because everyone's acknowledged that that's a useful activity and it's the natural extension of what they've funded. If the preprint becomes that, then I think that those models will come.
I think even though preprints in biosciences are 4 years old, I think we already see in certain disciplines, we see a change in reputation evaluation, which includes the presence of certain kinds of work on certain kinds of preprint service.
And if you follow that evolutionary stage back, if sharing earlier becomes more of a reputation-building activity, then open data initiatives and things like that begin to take off. And so I think, you know, you have to be able to say this is the very beginning of that. There's an opportunity to continue to push in that direction, in which case you've got things like micro-publications, data papers, just data set sharing. All of those become, you know, research objects that are treated the way journal articles are today and given their own kind of weight, merit, and validation.
Okay, I'm going to move on now, otherwise we won't get through everything. But I suppose actually that was almost, you know, I should have asked the question more directly. I suppose what I was really getting at with that question, now I thought about it, is does owning a preprint server give a publisher an edge in attracting more of the articles that go through it and hence offset that cost? But anyway, I'm not giving you time to answer.
Too late now, Simon.
Too late. I should have asked that earlier.
What do you mean by owning?
Well, exactly. We'll have to continue that later. Right, so my third question, or is it my fourth, because I just put an extra one in, which Liz is going to pick up for us, is what opportunities are there for publishers to help researchers share more of their research?
Thank you. And this, I think, the last comment really just segues into this kind of concept of thinking about research outputs in a kind of different way. For those people who know me, I used to work at a funding agency for many years, and I have an evaluation background, and I've worked in impact and metrics and assessment. Moved to F1000, working mainly with funding and kind of new partners to think about how research outputs are shared and providing new tools and kind of initiatives to share work. So it's really interesting to kind of be part of this discussion. So one of the things that I wanted to just talk about particularly is rethinking what a research output is. The focus historically has been on research articles. Researchers are judged, you know, the currency of an article is kind of part of the career path. It's kind of the main thing that people are judged on. And I think the main issue, I think, as was raised right at the start, is that there is a real infrastructure around articles. So it's easy to kind of get information on articles, how they're used. And I think what's happened is we've built a whole kind of industry and metrics and judgments around the currency of a research article being published in a certain place. We built that on a historical infrastructure around publishing, which developed over 350 years. It's certainly not a bad thing. We want to keep people being able to publish their work and have reputation associated with the work and quality measures on that work. But I think there is an opportunity now, and I think we've been relatively slow. And in the funding world, there's a massive kind of acknowledgement over time that researchers really only ever share a small proportion of the work that they've been funded to do. And that just seems, it's illogical. Funders don't want that. They want researchers to be able to share what they've done, what they've been funded to do, and I think articles is just a small part of that. In certain disciplines, it's a large part of that, but I think, again, as I mentioned, one size does not fit all, but I think we have an opportunity to think about how funders and how research has an impact, and articles are just one part of that, so I think there's an opportunity to rethink what we do, what we share, and how research is communicated. As has been talked about here, really, researchers are already doing this. There's a massive demand from researchers to share work in different ways. John just talked about preprints, the work that we're doing at F1000. I'll just show you an example in a moment. But researchers are sharing through blogs. They're all kind of ways for research to be shared in different aspects. Some of it is in articles still, but there's a huge range of things that researchers are now doing. They're taking it into their own hands. They're not relying on traditional processes all the time. And I think there's a real demand for that, so I think there's real opportunities for publishers to kind of get behind that, work with researchers, work with funders, work with demand, and think about how to do things a bit differently, or a lot differently. So one of the things that we've been doing at F1000, it was mentioned, we have a post-publication peer review model. We've been testing out approaches to open peer review, open science, and again, I don't think we all talk about things in the same way. So when people use the word open science, I don't really think we always are all on the same page about what that means. And I think models around open peer review, again, there's so many different flavors of what that is, and I think that is a good thing, but I think we need to be very careful about making judgments about certain aspects of research and certain aspects of what open peer review is, which bits work, which bits don't work. And I think there is an opportunity for a range of models for different situations. So what we've been doing at F1000 is basically saying to funding agencies and major institutions, so we've just announced an open research platform with the Montreal Neurological Institute, who basically want to promote open data, all the work that they've been doing through scans and brain imaging, all those kinds of things. They want to make it open really rapidly, so they want a place to do that. So we have the Montreal Open Research platform. And what we're doing as a publisher is essentially providing all the tools and services that a traditional publisher will do through a post-publication peer review model. So we still do invited quality peer review of the work, but we're playing with different models of peer review within the systems. So we're essentially providing services to funders and research institutions to allow the researchers who are linked to those institutions to share a wider range of whatever they want to share. We're reducing the barriers of what they want to share, but most of these people have a link to these organisations. And then it helps to address some of the issues that a lot of funding work is not published because it's difficult to publish. None of the people who are linked to this have to publish in these places. It's not mandated, it's an option, it's a new outlet for researchers to share. But it basically says, you have work you want to share, you should share this, and there's no excuse, here's a place for you to share it. And then it has all the benefits of rapidity, underpinning data, open data, all those kinds of sort of services that we kind of offer. One of the other areas that, as working in a funding agency, one of the things that has always been a bit of an issue is that, again, focusing on the currency of an article is just one of the outputs that researchers produce. There's a whole range of, especially in different disciplines, outside the life sciences particularly, but also in the life sciences, there are loads of work that comes out of research that there is no infrastructure to be able to track, to be able to look at how it's used and reused, which is a massive kind of thing for researchers. So things like technical reports, policy guidelines, clinical guidelines, what's commonly known as grey literature, but I hate that term. I think we ought to just put that on its head. And somebody suggested white papers as an alternative, and I kind of think anything to do with the colour is not really helpful. I think the main thing is that there's new ways of sharing research, and there's an opportunity through platforms like the one we have, but also others can do this through even things like preprint servers. There's a new way for researchers, basically, if you can build an infrastructure around research outputs, whether that's a data set, whether that's a piece of software, whether it's this kind of work, which this seems like a really good piece of lower-hanging fruit. If you have DOIs systematically and you can get usage metrics and you know who's funded it and all that kind of stuff around this kind of work, I think you're knocking at an open door. And I think researchers will really welcome that. And then I think, in my optimistic head, the focus in terms of impact in people's careers around research articles is because there is an infrastructure around that. And if you help to open the piece and provide alternatives for researchers to share their work in very different ways, then I think you'll start to address that. So just to sort of finish, I think there are a few trends kind of emerging, I think, in my perspective, kind of going forward. Definitely there's a move, again, one size does not fit all, but thinking beyond journals and actually thinking beyond articles. People are sharing things in very different ways. It's not always, doesn't always have to be crafted into a polished piece. People could just share data notes, case studies, all those kinds of things. There are ways to now look at how to help researchers share pieces and insights from their research in a more maybe granular way, obviously up to the researcher, but providing solutions to allow them to share what they want to share, not within a fixed infrastructure that we currently have, but working with the funders and the researchers to think about what suits what they want to do. Rethinking authorship, that's a kind of thing, as somebody mentioned that earlier again. I think, yeah, contributions and different aspects of people's roles is really important to kind of think about in sharing work. Digitization, I think the key thing is that you need to have information that you can track. You can look at how it's built, and I think the idea of having an infrastructure that some kind of commonality that we can kind of use, terminologies properly and agree, even if it's just a minimum set of terminologies, would really help in being able to talk about what we mean by open science, what do we mean by usage of a document, those kinds of things. And then the whole thing around ORCID and kind of linking information together it just seems really obvious thing to try to sort of push forward. If we can start linking research outputs together across the piece to funders, using good, consistent metadata, it would make everybody's life a lot easier, including the researchers, which is where it sort of starts. Researchers don't want to be spending time re-entering information, kind of keying information together. If we can make it easier for researchers to share their outputs, that would accelerate impact. And I guess that's my final point. I think we need to just be really clear about when we're doing experiments and understanding what all these changes mean. I think we need to do more experimentation and publishing of how different models work, when they work, which disciplines they work for best, and be much more kind of open to understanding what it means to be tracking impact, providing access, those kinds of things. So I think that's, ask more questions of the panel.
Thanks very much. So, same format again, please. And any questions from the audience? Yes.
Hello, I'm Anthony Watkinson, Cyber Research, and I've held off until now asking a question because there's such an exciting panel and so many exciting questions, so I didn't need to say anything. But I just wanted to say one thing, which is really more of a comment. Among the work we're doing, in fact, most of the work we're doing at the moment is on what we call Harbingers of Change, and we've got a grant for 1916, 1917, we hope 2026. It's too difficult with my age. 2016, 2017, which finished now. I'm going to have a report in, and 2018. Now, we're working on early career researchers, yeah? Across 7 countries, and these are intensive interviews. Almost all early career researchers think they are able and will be doing a change, making change in the structure of scholarly communication. That's the good news. And the good news also is they're beginning to be more, in the second year, they're being more articulate about what they want. They've learned a lot in a year, okay? Second thing, however, is the great majority of them see absolutely no change in the demand on them to produce papers in high impact factor journals. They think they're being judged on that, okay? This is 2 basic points I'm making on the basis of research. And what the hell do we do about it? We've said some of that, but any other comments, welcome.
I think it goes back to what Hannah said a little bit as well. I think it needs to be something that's cross-sector, but it needs to be sort of funders and institutions really taking that on and showing leadership. And we need some people to kind of step out of the zone and show. I think there's lots of examples happening. I know that there are discussions across a number of funding agencies now to basically say, when grants are being discussed, for example, you need to be careful and make sure that you're being holistic about what you're considering as criteria for making a judgment around that. And it needs to start with examples like that, and researchers need to know that that is happening.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, when I was talking about how we could Pippa's question, the need to communicate better the processes that grant review undergoes, and the sort of that when journal names are mentioned, that behaviour is actively crushed, basically, during panel discussions and grant review discussions. It is not acceptable behaviour for any of our panel members to mention that kind of things. But grant review process is a complex. There's lots of areas that we could do better, perhaps, I think, to talk about how we're not looking at impact factors. But as Louise mentioned, Wellcome is perhaps slightly more forward on this. There's a lot of other funders. So one of the things that we're trying to do within Wellcome is to work with other funders, not just within Europe and UK, but globally, to try and shift that balance away from the article and the impact factor. But it feels like a slow game.
So can I just come back on that? Just the other thing, I mean, a lot of funding agencies, a lot of research institutions and publishers also have signed up to the DORA Declaration, which is the Declaration on Research Assessment. But I think one of the challenges of that, even though there's a lot of goodwill around that you shouldn't be judged on where you publish, it's what you publish that's important, how that's used and reused. I think, again, it comes down to there is a lack of infrastructure to allow you to be able to track other things than articles, so it makes it really difficult. So if we could make some inroads into some of those other research outputs much more consistently. I mean, Louise talked about data, but there's places that it would be easier to start rather than try to solve everything. And again, couple that with experiments and see how it works. I think that's the key thing. You have to make steps forward rather than, we always talk about how difficult it is to change it, but my view is just because it's difficult, you shouldn't try. We've got to try to start to do something, and it needs to be cross-sector.
Just got one more minute for other comments on the panel before we move on.
I would just say that the
No, carry on.
John.
I would just say that there's certainly been a lot of discussion here about the funders. I think the institutions obviously have an enormous role here, and I think that there is, because they're the ones who decide whether or not you're going to get tenure, whether you're going to get your advancement, what your career trajectory is going to be, and they make the hiring decisions. And so, as long as they start, if they keep that as part of their biosketches, as that part of their requirements, then it will continue, it will perpetuate. I'm hoping that, these things are starting to change. So you watch what NIH has done, and they've said, okay, well, we're going to change what is considered the criteria of a work product. And that is going to be valuable. As others start to adopt that, that could create more of a movement. But somebody's got to start. And so, as Wellcome has started, as Gates might have started, how institutions now start that rolling along, it will take time, but hopefully we're there.
John, final comment?
I think I was going to echo really what Louise said. Change needs to happen in the institutions, Anthony, and it is. I think you can see places in the undergrowth where digital natives are becoming chairman of departments and bringing their information habits and values with them, and they are making change from within. I can think of 4 or 5 examples in my personal acquaintance at places like Rockefeller and elsewhere. So I totally understand the despair of your young researchers, but things are changing, but it is slow and it's tough.
Very, very quickly.
No, the point is, when I talk to funders, I'm not talking about any of you because you're the cutting edge. Actually, you're the cutting edge. And okay, John knows these people. There are not many of them, I can tell you. Okay, funders do not talk to the learned societies. I've talked to this repeatedly. I've talked to the European funders. They have a small cohort of what they say are representative academics, or not, actually. None of them have anything to do with any learned societies at all. The British seems just as bad. I'm not talking about Wellcome. I'm talking about those dreadful people who come and speak on behalf of the funders. They don't talk to academics. They talk to a very small group of people who probably support their views, but they don't speak to the people here.
Thank you. Right. Okay, I'm going to move on so we can get through our 5 questions, otherwise it'd be terrible. So my 4th question, can or should funders become their own publishers? In fact, you get a bonus extra question. Is this the modern equivalent of how the original university presses operated? Hannah Hope.
Okay, so I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak. The disadvantage of going forth is that you sort of feel that a lot of what you were going to say has already been said, so apologies for any repetition. I am not having slides, I'm going to risk this. So, for those of you that don't know Wellcome, we're a global charity. We exist to improve health for everyone by helping great ideas to thrive. And within that sentence, you have why we are interested in scholarly communication, because ideas on their own are not going to lead to change. But we believe as well that we can do this faster by ensuring that outputs of the research we fund are made available to all as soon as possible. And I'm going to talk about outputs throughout this talk rather than publications, because that really now is the focus for research, for Wellcome and the research that we're funding. So we view scholarly communication as being quite vital to enabling us to achieve our mission. And so that's why we get involved in it. We want our funded research outputs to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We're interested in the FAIR principles. And we've been involved in this for a very long time. For publications, we've had an open access policy for over 10 years. We fund a repository, Europe PMC. We're willing to pay APCs, book posting charges, and most recently we've got our publisher requirements. What we're trying to do is shape a scholarly communications market that we believe meets our needs as a client. So while a lot of our past efforts have had a significant impact on the free availability and the accessibility of Wellcome-funded research, we're not necessarily driving changes in other aspects. Things that Louise has mentioned earlier, length of time taken to publish an article, bias, poor peer review, research waste, the disconnect between the publication and the underlying data. As I said, Wellcome now, we're interested in research outputs. We don't want to see this separation anymore. And these are things that and the other thing is, talking about outputs, we want to reward our researchers. We want to be able to give them recognition for all the other things that they are doing within their work, for the data, peer review, code, software, tools. And as Liz mentioned, it's very hard for us to do that within the current infrastructure that's in place within scholarly communication. And these aren't just our frustrations, but they're the frustrations of our researchers as well. And we want our researchers to do research, to solve problems. We don't want them to spend their time trying to box up their research into a format that fits a journal article. We want them to have the flexibility to share their research as research rather than as a kind of article-shaped box. So that is why we've perhaps, some might say, gone beyond being a simple client and stepped into publishing. Because we want to support our researchers' needs and ensure that they're met, and we want to engage them and empower them in the publishing process. So some of the ventures, one that hasn't been mentioned yet is eLife, launched in 2011 with Howard Hughes Medical Institute and the Max Planck, to demonstrate that open access journals can be high quality and to ensure that the journal is editorially led by scientists. But also, eLife had the mission of trying to innovate and take advantage of a purely digital environment and to generate open source tools that could support wider innovation within the scholarly communications market. And I think at the time that felt quite a radical step within Wellcome and also perhaps within what was an article in publishing at the time. Last year, we wanted to take a step further. We launched Wellcome Open Research, as Liz has already mentioned, to really kind of look at pushing further the boundary of what a research publication is, and to use the Wellcome brand to encourage our researchers, to lend our support to that engagement, that exploration, that trying of new things, to get our researchers to really engage with that. So, as Liz has already mentioned, we're looking to publish faster. We're looking to remove editorial bias, transparent post-publication peer review, ensuring underlying source data is available. We're also looking to break down the restrictions on what article types can be published. Wellcome doesn't just fund life sciences research. We've got social science, we've got education research, and they all have different article formats. So Wellcome Open Research as a platform needs to have that flexibility. And since we've launched new article formats based on author feedback. So we're really trying to meet their needs with this platform. Another attraction is that the Wellcome Open Research model is relatively cheap in terms of an entry cost for us to get involved, and certainly on an article basis with APCs of less than $1,000. That's a significant saving on what our median APC is generally. You've already seen that the model is being widely adopted by other funders and institutions, and I think based on the conversations that we've had recently, the fact that institutions are getting involved in exploring different publication mechanisms, I think that's a really positive sign that everyone is looking to shift away from a kind of purely article world. It is slow, but it's a start to say that people are interested in this. So what else was I going to say? Yes, well, should funders become publishers? Now, I'm not sure that I fully agree that we are a publisher, but then as John pointed out, what is a publisher is a very different thing. You know, I think we are a client of publishers. We contract services. Wellcome Open Research would not exist without F1000. Wellcome has no publishing editorial office. I don't think we want one. But what we want is a scholarly communications market that meets our needs, and we are willing to work with publishers to ensure that that is achieved. And I guess maybe that does mean that it's a bit like university presses.
Okay, same format again. Questions, comments on the floor?
Hi, I'm a little late. How long should a question take? So I have had a web page since 1993. My name's Joanna Bryce. I'll be speaking tomorrow about artificial intelligence. And all my papers I've ever published are there. All the software I've ever written that people might want to use is out there. And about 15 years ago, I had an idea, which was that I knew about large corpus linguistics, and I learned about implicit bias and the implicit association test. And I talked to people about my idea. I worked with undergraduates about it. We published papers into conferences. We wrote blog posts about it, you know. About a year ago, this paper, I was at Princeton, actually 2 years ago now. I was at Princeton, and I gave a talk about this idea, and a postdoc came and said, I want to help you push it towards publication. And she went and spent a lot of time. She read every single paper and that had come out about implicit association. And she used all the new bleeding edge stuff about how we do large corpus linguistics. And to make a long story short, that paper's in Science now, and it's changing the world. And even though I'd been working on this idea for 15 years, you know, we made an archive paper, we put that out, that already got some attention. Science sent it to the people who had done the work, and they found huge holes in our paper and our reasoning. And they helped us edit it, they made it more readable, and they helped us correct our own overgeneralizations. So when you tell me you want to make sure that researchers don't waste their time boxing up their research, I have learned so much, and that's just the most extreme case. I've had 4 or 5 articles that are so much better than all my other articles because, you know, and it was hard. I don't think they're necessarily all my best ideas that are in the best articles, but that time spent boxing is time spent making the science actually the best it can possibly be. And so I'm worried when I hear, I agree that like we need to get our data sets out there and we need to get people paying attention to them, but I also think we need to invest a lot of time making sure we've made a really good product, especially when it changes people's lives and their understanding.
Yeah, so I perhaps misused the term boxing it. I think I was talking about time spent formatting, for example, or you know, cutting a figure out because you're only allowed 10 figures when you submit to that journal. Absolutely, I think there is value in peer review and the improvement of articles and sharing of that knowledge and discussion. And that's why, you know, for example, Wellcome Open Research, it has a post-publication peer review. Peer review we still believe is very important, whether it's on an article or on a data set, that won't necessarily look the same, peer review for those different outputs. But no, I'm sorry if I gave the impression that we didn't think that peer review and the editorial process doesn't have value. No, absolutely. I think, you know, the comment that journals just do peer review isn't fair on them. I think there's a lot more that journals and editorial does add to research outputs. So no, I think you're right. There is a lot of value to be found in that, and we support that. And I think we are, to go back to Louise's point around, you know, the cost. That does cost money, and I think, you know, I have to say, Wellcome certainly recognizes that we spend a lot of money on supporting, not only through grants, but also through article processing charges, to support the value that is given through the editorial process.
I mean, I would just say, to follow up the questioner, that I think all of us believe that peer review is vitally important. The informal, or the dissemination of work before it is submitted for publication, I didn't really say anything about this in my presentation, but part of the advantage of posting preprints is the ability to receive crowdsourced peer review, essentially. And we are trying to encourage that being done on our site in an open way, because anecdotally we hear from our authors that most of what they hear as feedback on their preprints comes through email or conversations at meetings or whatever it is. So there needs to be more of this kind of more public discussion and debate designed exactly to do what you said, which is to improve the communication of the final communication of that work.
I just want to say again, I'm sorry but to take more time, but yes, peer review, but like I said, I went to MIT. I'm pretty prominent. I have been talking to people. I've had email. It was not the same as having professional editor who helped us figure out how to present the information, told us what to take out of the supplement and what to stick into the supplement, and really top-end reviewers when they recognized this was important work, and even the copy editing. And even the next tier down with journals, we're not getting the copy editing anymore. So yeah, I think there's a big issue here about when people recognize how much time to put into something that's worth disseminating.
So I just want to make one comment that not everybody's a rock star. Okay, not everyone's going to have an entourage. Not everybody is going to have someone carry their bags and fly first class. And so there is a lot of science, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of discovery that's done that isn't going to get that treatment. And so how do we make sure that they are given that fair shake? How do we make sure that that is happening how do we raise the water level for everybody without saying everybody has to get the rock star treatment in order to, have the best research and honed and treated in this way? I know science is process and I know it's a fantastic process, but my point is that not everybody gets published in science. And so.
It shouldn't just be 0 and 1. It's got to
Agreed.
be gradient, and we've got to try to bring the best stuff forward.
Agreed.
And I think that's what exists within the market currently, and I think, certainly from the ventures that Wellcome has been involved in, we are just trying to experiment and explore what other options are out there. We're not saying, Wellcome researchers don't have to publish in Wellcome Open Research. It is just an option. We would never put that restriction, but it's just about seeing what can be done, I think, at the moment, to exploring that gradient.
Okay, I'm going to move on, and before I move on, I'm going to check with Audrey that since we started 5 minutes late, I'm allowed to carry on a bit. Great, thank you. So, my last question. How might radical innovations in discovery affect the nature of content delivery? Kristen.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to speak on this. I think one of the benefits of going last is that most of the points have been made, so I can be very brief. The Collaborative Knowledge Foundation, or COCO to all of you, is a nonprofit service technology organization with a mission to improve how knowledge is created, produced, and shared. We build technology, but we believe these solutions are actually a combination of collaboration, culture change, and code. So the question here originally was around how content is discovered and delivered, but frankly, neither of these have changed a lot in the last 20 or so years that we've been online, or really in the last 350 years that publishing has been happening in print. And discovery hasn't changed a lot because we haven't changed the processes by which we publish very much. And I think these points have been made a little bit already. The reality is that we are dumbing down what research is happening. I think the point made that that the publishing process can improve The work is a really important one, but typically we remove huge chunks of what was done in order to communicate through formats that we've predetermined are the appropriate formats. And at a lot of conferences like this, we talk about this ideal state, the article of the future, this constellation of networked research objects that will magically be communicated to the world, tied to each other, data sets, code, protocols, all of that in this sort of article of the future, a living, dynamic thing that changes over time with post-publication peer review. And I love this idea. I think it's fantastic, but we're so far from achieving it at this stage. We actually, I think technology in general that underlies the process is, as the point was made, very, very old, and it actually, it is removing some of the value that the peer review process or the publishing process could be offering. So to improve the output, we actually have to think about how we improve the input. We can't have that beautiful living research communication process unless we change how we take information and research from researchers into the publishing process. And right now that process has been very stymied. Right now it's something of, and I don't mean to denigrate the research itself, a garbage in, garbage out. We're asking for a very limited amount of information from researchers, and we're producing a very flat output. So it's very challenging to improve that input process with our existing tools and processes and platforms that we use today. And Louise made the point that, you know, our infrastructure is 20 years old. This is absolutely true. We typically publish using platforms that are big silos, essentially, large, big box platforms. And they are fairly rigid. They have usually a one-to-one relationship between a service provider and a technology platform, which means that the service provider isn't incorporating technologies built by others. They're basically selling only what they build. And other industries have moved past that kind of one-to-one relationship, where lots and lots of different technologies and tools are being built by lots of people, and service providers are selectively picking those and choosing them and creating solutions for people. And that many-to-many relationship with that kind of diversity happening is a completely different way of thinking about technology. And in the publishing industry, we just haven't yet embraced that. So the solution to this, is not just a better box. It's not a better platform. It's not a single one-size-fits-all solution. If we've learned anything in the last, say, 30 years of internet technology building, it's that there is no one magic application that will solve all of our problems. So what we need to do is think about really what's happening organically in the wider web and other high-tech industries, which is the building of an ecosystem. A lot of different frameworks, a lot of different point solutions, a lot of different parts and pieces that together can create new solutions. And this is already happening organically. We can accelerate that process. There are standards now and ways for these tools to automatically begin to work with one another and work across different boundaries. So if we think about what that new ecosystem looks like, I can actually show you some examples of where that's already emerging. Substance is an Austria-based organization building a code library, essentially, that enables you to assemble pieces and parts to create dynamic online web editing tools. And they've been building this library for years, and this is important because if we want to change the way we engage with authors, if we want to change the way our editors and production staff engage with content, they need to be able to see it. They need to be able to interact with it. They can't just have a sort of word attachment in some sort of system. And Substance themselves are using their own library of code to produce a JATS editor called Texture. At COCO, we're also using that code library, and we've added to it, and we've produced an HTML editor called Wax. So these tools are beginning to create a suite of opportunities, a suite of tools that will enable people to engage very actively and dynamically with content at every stage, from authoring through the submission process and through the entire publishing process. And we've built at COCO a tool called Ink, which is a ingest and conversion tool that allows you to bring content in and move it from one format to another, enrich it, and do a lot of automated tasks that we'd like to see happen that are currently either being done manually or not at all. Or they're done at the end of the process and we could be doing them at the beginning of the process. There's a New Zealand organization called Stencilla, which COCO has supported and is currently working with Substance and eLife. And they're making tools that can create data-driven documents, living figures within articles. Code for Science's DAT tool enables actual live streaming of large databases. And when we talk about making more open data opportunities available, this actually lowers the barrier for that to happen. eLife released the Lens Reader some years back, which was actually built by Substance. And a COCO team member, Rick Smithuna, has built Science Fair, which took Lens, the Substance library, and DAT, pulled it together to offer a desktop discovery and library management tool, and that's now being made visible through the eLife platform. The point is that all these projects are interrelated. They're all built to operate together. They're built to fit with new publishing frameworks like the PubSuite framework that we're building at COCO, the eLife Continuum platform, and other platforms. So you can take big frameworks and you can put point solutions and then create custom platform solutions that can change and evolve over time as all of these different tools emerge and evolve. You can swap one thing in and pull the other out. It's like a sort of unending set of Lego pieces that you can build and create and swap in and out to build platforms. It means platforms are no longer static. There's not a big box with boundaries that you can just take and replace with one box with another box. You can actually construct these things much more fluidly. So this is emerging. This is at its early stages, this kind of ecosystem. But why is it working? And there are a few reasons why. One is that people are building libraries of code now. They're not just constructing code by scratch every day, which means you can reuse the work of others much more flexibly, which lowers the cost to software development. Also, people are using APIs so that things can talk to each other. That means people can code things in different languages and those things can work together. Who knew? That's new. These are all open source. They're all open source tools, frameworks, or platforms. And that means that they can work with each other, they can build off of each other's work, and that means that you don't have to pay for the reinvention of access control every time you're paying for a platform, or the reinvention of a reporting framework or a structure or something like that. Right now, we're reinventing those things every time we build a new platform. But with this open source model, you can swap these things in and out and people can use each other's work much more flexibly and you're not having to reinvent over and over again. Everyone can see each other's code, they can comment on it, they can improve on it. And that means also that these people are not all competing head to head, the way vendors, for example, might today. They may be building into the same spaces, but they're much more likely to collaborate on that and say, wow, actually, if you're building that, I'll go over here and build this complementary thing myself. And that's a fundamental shift in how we're creating the publishing infrastructure. So I think if we want to change the way in which we are using the publishing process to improve research and research output, then we need to invest in this type of new ecosystem for our publishing infrastructure. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kristen, very much. I'm conscious we're really running late, but any questions, comments from the floor?
Hi, Richard Wynn, Ares Systems. Just wanted to comment about the infrastructure comments and channel Jeff Builder a little bit, or I think I'd be channeling him in saying that real infrastructure change is not really going to come from building things, but from standards that allow things to interoperate. And I think that's where the focus should be with infrastructure.
I absolutely agree, yes. I mean, and it is through standards and it is through things that connect up different component parts of infrastructure that we're able to see this type of ecosystem emerging, absolutely.
Hi, it's Pablo, and I just want to ask you a very quick question. So we were just talking about infrastructure, and you were saying that those standards, when we are talking about infrastructure, they really work. But then your first slide, you were talking about the publication process, and I don't understand why those standards work when we are talking about infrastructure, but some standards don't work when we are talking about a publication process.
Which standards are you saying don't work when we talk about the publication process?
On the first slide, when basically you were saying that, well, maybe you can bring it back.
What I'm saying is that currently our publication process has not evolved significantly in the last 20 years that we've been online, and it is part because while there are standards, and there are standards both in terms of publishing standards,
yes,
and there are technology standards, that we haven't embraced some of what's happening in the wider web to make our infrastructure really accelerate the publishing process. I mean, I think that the technology infrastructure alone is not enough to revolutionize publishing. It's certainly not going to change the reputation issues we've talked about. It's not going to change people's motivations. But if we begin to use infrastructure, use technologies and tools in interfaces that actually engage people to do things differently, we have the possibility to rapidly accelerate the evolution of the publishing process to be more the way Hannah was describing, where research is actually being communicated early, and people are discussing things and engaging with each other and improving upon the work prior to it coming into its formulated state as a preprint or an article. And then as it enters those states, there are a lot of ways for people to actively engage with it. Technology has the potential to really help that process along. That was my point, and it hasn't thus far.
I'm gonna have to cut you off. Do you want to come back, Liz, very quickly, and then we're really gonna have to wrap up the session.
Yeah, just on a general point, I think there's been a kind of historic thing, and it happens outside publishing and everywhere. Is just you've got to be careful not to let technology drive what you produce. I think the key thing, in a lot of areas, is that we need to decide where the pain points are. What are the things we're trying to solve? And you can be super clever coming up with lots of new tools and kind of innovations, but actually, what point are you trying to help researchers do? And there's a lot of things and tools and things out there that are being invented, and some of them just don't get uptake because they're not really solving pain points. I think we should be focusing particularly with limited resources on things that really are the things that need changing.
Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody, and thanks very much to our panel for taking part today.